The snow had not yet come, but the sky threatened it. Low and gray like bruised flesh, it pressed down on the open plains, a silence thick enough to swallow sound. Wind scraped across the land in long, tired sighs, lifting dust from the frozen earth and whirling it into ghost-like shapes that vanished just as quickly. The house, if one could still call it that, leaned hard against the wind like a drunk fighting sleep, weather-worn, half-split at the seams, roof patched with whatever wood she could scavenge after the storm last spring. Mara stood on the porch with her arms crossed against her ribs, trying to decide if she'd wait for the next gust or go inside before it came. Her coat was threadbare. The cuffs had unraveled last winter, and she had sewn them up again with string, but the wind found the gaps anyway. Beneath it, she wore the same faded dress she'd been married in, now 6 winters old and bleached by sun and time to something between bone and ash. Inside, the children were quiet, too quiet, which meant they were either sleeping or hiding their hunger again. She couldn't blame them. There hadn't been flour in the bin for 3 days now. The last of the dried beans had gone into the pot yesterday morning, and the broth it made was more water than meal. She had scrapped the bottom of the lard tin for grease and hoped the illusion of fat would fool their stomachs. It hadn't. A storm was coming, not a loud one, the kind that arrived with silence and stayed longer than it should. She had written to her brother in Wyoming twice, maybe 3 times. There had been no answer. Maybe the letter never made it. Maybe he'd read it and folded it shut like the memory of her, tossed it in the fire with the rest of what he'd tried to forget. Their last words had been hard ones. And when Thomas died, when the fever took him fast and cruel, it had seemed wrong to ask anyone else to carry her burden. She did not cry often now. There was no time for it, and no use in it. But some part of her, deep and quiet, still grieved every day. Grieved the men buried out past the cottonwoods. Grieved the girls who had lost the shine in their eyes. Grieved the boy who no longer asked questions, who sat with his father's broken pocket watch in his lap as though willing the hands to move. She turned from the wind and stepped inside. The door scraped against the warped floorboards. The fire in the stove had died to embers. She added a stick of wood, then another, and knelt to coax the flame with her breath. It caught slowly, stubbornly, as though even fire had grown weary of trying. When the room brightened, her children stirred. Clara sat up first, hair matted, eyes rimmed with sleep. She was only 9, but already had the solemnity of a woman twice her age. Joseph and Delcy were curled together like pups, still warm from sleep, and she let them lie. "We'll go to town tomorrow," she said quietly. "You'll find work or trade something. There's always a way." Clara said nothing, only nodded. She had stopped asking questions weeks ago. Outside, the wind changed. A deeper sound, now more weight to it. Mara crossed to the window, moved the thin curtain aside. Far off, nearly to the horizon, a shape moved against the land. A horse. No wagon. No banner of dust behind it. Just a rider alone, cutting through the afternoon light like a shadow too solid to be a ghost. She felt her heart trip once in her chest, then go still again. Maybe it was someone passing through. Maybe trouble. Or maybe, though she barely dared the thought, maybe someone who still remembered her name. She watched the figure draw nearer, slow and steady, and did not move. By dusk, the rider had not yet reached the house. He moved without hurry, as if time was not pressing, as if the cold did not bite. Mara had watched until her eyes blurred and the horizon turned blue, then lit the lamp and settled the children with the last crumbs of cornbread and a story told without much voice. It was one her mother used to tell, of a woman who turned into a hawk and flew over the plains, watching her children from above, bringing them dreams in feathers and wind. The fire had dwindled again by the time she heard the hoofbeats, low and deliberate. She stood, heart still but sharp, and pressed her palm against the window pane. There he was, close now, a man all in the saddle, head bowed under the brim of his hat, his coat dark with dust and weather. His horse moved like it had traveled, far-ribbed, tired but steady. He didn't come straight to the door. He stopped a dozen paces out and lifted one hand in quiet greeting. Not a wave, just a sign, "I mean no harm." Mara opened the door but stayed in the frame. She didn't speak. Her hands were still red from chopping kindling earlier, and she wiped them on her skirt without thinking. The cold wrapped around her, but she held her ground. "I'm looking for a woman named Mara Calloway," the man said. His voice was even, neither warm nor cold. It used to be Mara Haynes. Born in Stillwater, came west in 80-6 with a husband named Thomas. The sound of her maiden name took her back like a slap. "Mara," she said, slower than she meant to. "Who's asking?" He took off his hat. His hair was dark, threaded with gray near the ears. "Name's Ezra Lorne. Your brother sent me. Said you might need help." She stared, unsure if she had heard right. "My brother?" He nodded. "Samuel. H.E.S. living near Rock Springs now. Broke his leg last month. Can't travel, but he said if you still lived out here, you'd be needing someone with strong hands and no place to be." Ezra dismounted, moving stiffly, like a man who'd spent too many nights in the saddle. He didn't come closer than the edge of the porch. His eyes were hard to read, steady, but not sharp. He looked at her the way one might look at a fence to see if it would hold. "I don't have much to offer," Mara said. "Didn't come looking for much. Just a roof and a hot meal. If it's warm and dry, that'll do fine." She stepped aside and let the door swing open. He slept in the shed that night, though she offered the corner near the fire. He insisted. Said he preferred the cold air and that his horse needed watching. She gave him a blanket and a lantern, and when she closed the door behind him, she leaned against it, listening to the wind. In the morning the children stared. They had not seen a man here since Thomas died. Ezra didn't speak much, but he nodded at each of them, slow and polite, before setting to work. He chopped wood until the pile rose again, patched the roof where it sagged, and cleared the trough for snowmelt. He didn't ask questions. Mara watched him from the porch, arms folded tight. He was not young, but he moved like someone who'd kept himself intact. She wondered what kind of man answered a letter like that, a brief, desperate note scrawled in the margins of another. She wondered what kind of man didn't ask why no one else had come. That night, he took his supper on the steps and ate with quiet care, like the bowl in his hands meant something. Afterward he spoke. "Your boy's got Thomas' eyes," she said. "Hard to miss." Mara didn't reply at first. The children were asleep. "He carries that watch around like it's still ticking," she said softly. Ezra looked out across the dark yard. "Sometimes it's not about the time. It's about the weight of it." She didn't ask what he meant. The wind sighed again. The snow would come soon. "The night's not over yet. Subscribe and stay by the fire." By the third morning, frost curled along the window edges like white lace, and the sky held that pale hush that came just before snowfall. Ezra was already outside, splitting wood. The rhythm of the axe was even impatient, not the furious hacking of a man proving something. He worked like someone who knew every swing counted, not just for the pile but for what it meant to finish the job. Mara watched him from the kitchen. The kettle hissed, the children still bundled in their quilts. She didn't move right away. There was something steadying about watching someone else do what needed doing without being asked. It had been too long since she had seen that. She brought him coffee in a tin mug, fingers wrapped around the warmth like it might pass into her bones. Ezra paused when she stepped outside but didn't speak. She handed him the cup, and for the first time, their eyes met without hesitation. "You sleep all right?" she asked. He nodded. The wind kept the coyotes soft. "That's all a man needs." She almost smiled. "You've been on the road long?" "Since late September." He took a sip. "Been chasing work and trying to outrun winter. Looks like you caught me. You always answer letters from strangers?" "No," he said, "but Samuel's a friend. Helped me once when I didn't deserve it. Said you were his only blood left, and you were holding things together with nothing but thread and grit. Thought maybe I could make myself useful." She didn't know what to say to that, so she just nodded, and they stood there a moment, the cold thick around them, steam rising from the cup like a signal. By the end of that week, the snow came heavy. Ezra helped bring the animals into the lean -2, repaired the coop that had nearly collapsed under last year's weight. He didn't move into the house, though she offered again. He took his meals in the kitchen but kept his bedroll out in the shed, saying it was easier to rise early that way. He began showing Joseph how to check the fence line, how to mend a split rail with wire and patience. Taught Clara how to lash kindling for the stove and made her laugh once an actual laugh. short and surprised. Mar heard it from the other room and nearly dropped the plate she was holding. Ezra didn't force himself into the center. He moved around the edges, fixing what was broken, asking for nothing in return. But the silences between them were starting to change. One evening after the children were asleep, Mara sat sewing by the stove. Ezra was repairing the harness strap that had cracked with the cold. The fire snapped. Outside, snow pressed against the window like breath. "I used to think if I just worked hard enough, nothing could fall apart," she said, not looking up from the thread. Ezra didn't answer right away. "It's a fair belief," he said. "A hard one to let go of." She nodded. "But it doesn't hold. Not when sickness comes. Not when a man dies in the space of 3 days and leaves you with land too big for your hands. I know something about that." She glanced at him. His face was still, but his hands had stopped moving. "My wife died 8 years ago," he said. "Fever, same as yours. Left me a boy. He didn't make it through that first winter." The room was quiet but not cold. "I kept writing," he went on. "Tried to leave the sorrow behind me. Turns out sorrow's got legs longer than a horse." Mara set down her needle. "What made you stop?" Ezra looked at her. "I haven't. But this place, it slows 'em and down." They didn't speak after that. She handed him more thread. He finished the strap. The fire settled low, and outside the snow kept falling, soft as a secret. The first thaw came early, sudden and quiet. One morning the snow began to drip from the eaves in slow, rhythmic drops. By afternoon, the yard was a patchwork of slush and half-minus frozen mud, and the creek beyond the cottonwoods murmured again beneath the ice. The children threw open the door without being told, boots squelching through the yard as they laughed for the first time in weeks. Mara didn't stop them. Let them get wet. Let them be loud. She stood in the doorway, arms crossed loosely, watching them run. Ezra was in the pasture, hauling out the broken gate post. He paused, leaned against it for a breath, and caught her eyes. "How long's it been since they played like that?" he asked when he came back in, boots heavy with mud. "Since before Thomas took sick." He nodded, wiping his hands with an old cloth. "And today matters." She didn't reply, but her eyes softened. Inside, she boiled potatoes that had started to sprout and browned the last scrap of salted pork. Ezra sat at the table, carving a new handle for the broken ladle. The room was warm from more than just the fire. Lately, when he spoke to her, it didn't feel like he was waiting to leave. And when she spoke back, it was just politeness. There was something beneath it now, not quite hope, but maybe the roots of it. After supper, they sat outside on the porch. The snow was still thick under the trees, but the road had begun to show through in patches, dark and slick with melt. The sky stretched wide above them, the stars flickering like sparks caught in an old quilt. Mara pulled her shawl tighter. "When spring comes, what then?" Ezra leaned forward, elbows on his knees. "Hadn't thought that far. You don't strike me as a man who stays put." "I've never been one," he admitted. "But staying put and belonging aren't the same." She looked at him carefully. "And do you?" He didn't answer right away. "I don't know yet. I know there's much work in this land, fixing these things. It feels like I'm mending more than wood and wire." They were quiet after that. The wind had softened. A fox barked somewhere far off in the fields. Mars spoke without turning. "You're good with the children." "I was a father once," he said. "Some things don't leave you." She looked down at her hands, scarred and pale in the starlight. "You should know I didn't write Samuel for help. He sent that letter on his own." Ezra smiled, faint and real. "He said you wouldn't." She glanced sideways at him, half a warning in her voice. "I don't owe anyone anything. I'm not here to collect." A breath passed between them, thick with something unspoken but understood. The next morning, Mara woke before dawn. She stoked the fire, checked on the children, and stepped out into the gray light. Ezra was already outside, watching the horizon like it might speak to him. "There's a wagon coming," he said. She squinted. Just a blur at first, but it grew clearer. A dark shape pulled by 2 tired mules, wheels slow in the mud. A man in a town coat sat upright on the bench seat. When the wagon rolled into the yard, Mara's stomach knotted. She knew that man. His name was Barrett, and he worked for the bank in town. Last spring she had pleaded for more time. He had given her until harvest, but the wheat never came. Neither did the rain. Barrett stepped down, nodded politely at Ezra, and tipped his hat to Mara. "Mrs. Calloway," he said. Here on behalf of the bank." Ezra moved closer, silent and solid beside her. "You'll need to come back later," she said flatly. Barrett's expression stayed polite, but his tone sharpened. "You've had 2 extensions, and there's been no payment. The land reverts to the bank in April unless something changes." Mara stood her ground, but her breath caught. She felt Ezra's eyes on her. "Unless something changes," she echoed. He touched the brim of his hat. "He'll return in 2 weeks." When the wagon pulled away, Ezra turned to her. "What's the number?" She exhaled slowly. 160. He nodded once, like it was a nail that needed hammering. Then he said, "Let's change something." The barn became a workshop. By the next morning, Ezra had cleared the broken tools, swept out the mice nests, and started drawing plans in the dirt with the blunt end of a stick. Joseph watched, eyes wide, the way a child does when they recognize a man not just working but building. Clara carried boards. Mara brought nails she had hidden in a coffee tin 3 winters ago. "What are we doing?" she asked, wiping her hands. Ezra looked up from where he was nailing. "Harness repair, fence repair, anything we can fix for others." "You think people will pay for that?" "They'll pay for not freezing," he said, "or for getting their wagon back on the road. I know folks in town farther out. Word travels." Mara hesitated. She had worked to survive. She had never asked anyone for coin. Ezra rated in her face. "You're not taking charity. You're trading sweat for silver. That's different." She gave the faintest nod. They worked from sun minus up to near dark. Ezra showed Joseph how to tighten the leather on the yoke strap without cracking it, how to sand the splinters from old cedar handles. Mara stitched new linings for gloves and coats brought in by neighbors, those who had too much pride to beg but too much cold to wait. Ezra never stopped moving. HED work on hinges in the morning, ride into town by afternoon. And always he came back with something feed, spare parts, word of who might need a wheel mended or a stove ray minus welded. One night, he came back late with a sack of flour, a bag of oats, and a look in his eyes that said something more had happened. "They're whispering in town," he told Mara quietly as she poured water over his hands. "Barrett's been pressuring other families, selling land out from under folks who can't make the interest." Mara's jaw tightened. "And what do we do with whispers?" "We turn them into fire," he said, "and hold it steady." A week passed, then another. The sun started to feel warm again, and the soil grew soft beneath the children's boots. The yard filled with the clang of tools, the scent of warmed earth. Hope crept in, not loudly, but like moss, slow and certain. But it washed all ease. One night Mara found Ezra sitting alone on the back steps, coat wrapped around him, staring out toward the cottonwoods where Thomas was buried. "I keep waiting to feel like I've earned my place here," he said, not looking at her. "You think anyone ever does?" she asked. He looked at her then, and his eyes were all with some old hurt that had never healed right. "I buried them both in 1 week. My boy had curls like Clara's, and I was there. He'd gone to town for supplies. Came back and the fever had taken him." She sat beside him without a word. He went on, voice low. "I spent too long thinking I was running from that, but I think I've been looking for a way to carry it right." She reached over, her fingers brushing his. "Then carry it here, with us." He didn't answer, but he didn't move away. 2 mornings later, Barrett returned. His coat was pressed. His boots were polished. He stepped down from his wagon like a man already sure of the outcome. Ezra met him in the yard. "You're early," Ezra said. "I like to get things done before noon," Barrett replied. "Now about the land." "We've got your money," Mara interrupted, stepping forward. She handed him the pouch herself. 160. Barrett weighed it in his palm, then opened it and counted. "This isn't all coin," he muttered. "It's flour, leather, horseshoe nails, and repair vouchers from 6 neighbors," Ezra said flatly. "Every one of them signed." "Its value," Mara added. "It spends the same." Barrett looked at them both, eyes narrowed. "You might hold this land," he said slowly, "but it's not over." Ezra didn't flinch. "We're not waiting for it to be. Barrett left without tipping his hat. That evening the children sang while they worked, voices rising into the air like smoke. The house, once quiet as a grave, now rang with the small, clear sounds of a life returned. Ezra stood beside Mara in the doorway. She didn't speak, but she leaned into him slightly, enough to feel his warmth at her shoulder. "I think we can make something of this," she said. "We already have," he replied. Spring came fully then, slow and soft, painting the plains in muted greens and brown, the thawing mud leaving a smell that was sweet and sharp all at once. The children ran barefoot in patches of grass, chasing the sound of birds they hadn't heard since last fall. Mara worked in the garden, loosening soil with worn hands, seeds tucked into furrows, the rhythm of it grounding her in the pulse of life again. Ezra moved alongside her, carrying water, bending fences, fixing what the frost had broken. Some afternoons they simply stood together on the porch, letting the wind carry their silences. Not awkward, not tense, but full of unspoken understanding. Their hands brushed over a bucket or a sack of feed, and it was enough small gestures that said what words could not. One evening Mara found herself walking the edge of the creek, Joseph and Claire railing behind, Ezra following a few paces back. The sun had melted into amber on the horizon, the river catching the light in slow pulses. Mara stopped and looked at him. "Do you think we could stay?" she asked. Ezra tilted his head, studying her. "Do you mean here? On this land?" She nodded. "With the children. For a long while. Not just to get through one winter or the bank's deadlines." He looked down at the water, then back at her. "I think I already am," he said, "even if I didn't realize it at first." The children squealed, racing to splash in the shallow stream. Mara laughed, the sound high and free, and Ezra smiled in a way that softened all the lines of his face. Over the next weeks, they worked as a team. The house was repaired enough to withstand another winter. The barn held high-end feed, the garden promised vegetables. Word of Ezra's skill spread, and neighbors began bringing small jobs, paying in produce, coin, or labor. The land, once a burden, became a lifeline, each day marked by sweat and small victories. But the world beyond the clearing still pressed in. One afternoon, a rider came, dust rising behind him, a letter in his hand addressed to Mara. Ezra dismounted and waited, silent, while she opened it. It was from her brother Samuel. The letter spoke of his own struggles and an invitation, a chance for her to return east with him, to live without the weight of frontier winters, without the struggle of bare coverage and broken fences. Mara's fingers trembled. Ezra stepped closer, hand on hers, offering quiet strength. She looked at him, then at the children, their eyes bright with the safety and warmth she had fought to preserve. The choice was not easy. A secure past waited in Samuel's words. An uncertain future waited here, in sweat, in snow, in small triumphs. She said, voice catching, "I don't think I can leave." Ezra squeezed her hand. Then dawned, "Not unless your heart tells you to." The decision did not need more words. They returned to the work, the children laughing and helping where they could. Evenings found them together on the porch, quiet and unhurried, watching the sunset stretch gold across the plains. Mara felt the weight of her past lift slowly, replaced by the steady pulse of belonging and trust. By midsummer, the land had transformed. Corn sprouted in neat rows, the barn was brimming with hay, and neighbors came freely, offering help, trade, and news. Ezra repaired the wagon and harnesses for the local families, earning enough coin to invest in better tools, while Mara kept the garden and the children, teaching them patience and care. Together, they had stitched a life from the edges of what remained. One evening, as the sky deepened into indigo and stars began to pierce the darkness, Ezra offered her his hand in quiet ceremony, nothing ornate, nothing forced. She took it. Their fingers intertwined naturally, the gesture sealing more than an agreement. It was the promise of a shared path forward. The children watched from the doorway, understanding in their own way. Mara leaned her head on Ezra's shoulder, and for the first time in years, she felt safe, rooted, and unafraid. The wind whispered through the cottonwoods, carrying the promise of long days and gentle nights. Somewhere beyond, the plain stretched wide, indifferent but beautiful, and for once, it no longer mattered. They had survived the storm, the cold, the hunger, the lonely nights, and in the quiet aftermath they had found each other and themselves anew. The house was warm, the children were laughing, and life finally felt like a horizon they could step into together. The fire burned low in the hearth, and outside the moonlight glinted off the creek. Ma watched it and breathed deep, knowing the worst was behind them. The promise of tomorrow was theirs to shape. Subscribe and stay near as broken ground gives way to green shoots.